What would you do if silence protected someone else but cost you your dignity?
Harris County Courtroom.
Before we step into this courtroom, answer this honestly. If keeping your comfort meant losing your dignity, which would you choose? Would you protect peace or protect yourself? Tell me below in the comment section below. Harris County Courthouse, Houston. Courtroom 312 was silent as the final hearing began. The Texas state seal stood high behind the judge's bench. Papers rested neatly on polished wood. No raised voices. No visible hostility. Camila Brooks Duarte sat composed at the petitioner's table. Navy suit, shoulders straight. Her wedding ring rested on the table in front of her, instead of her hand. Across from her sat Álvaro Duarte, Portuguese-born, oil and logistics executive, a man known for precision and control. His expression remained steady, confident. The settlement drafted by his legal team lay ready for signature. Private, sealed, clean, a silent divorce. The judge reviewed the file and looked up. Mrs. Brooks Duarte, do you agree to the sealed settlement as presented? Álvaro did not look at Camila. He expected compliance. The arrangement protected his finances, his reputation, his timeline. Camila lifted her eyes. No, Your Honor. The words were calm, measured. A faint shift moved through the room. Álvaro's jaw tightened. Not anger, surprise. The judge adjusted her glasses. You are declining the agreement? Yes, ma'am. The word agreement felt misplaced. The silence that followed was no longer controlled. It was uncertain. The quiet divorce had just met resistance. Álvaro finally turned his head toward Camila. Not quickly, not dramatically, slowly. He studied her face as if searching for hesitation, for doubt, for the version of her he believed would choose silence. He found neither. His attorney leaned closer and whispered something urgent. The words were low, but the tension was clear. This was not how the hearing was supposed to unfold. The judge flipped through the settlement again. Mr. Duarte, she said evenly, was the petitioner fully informed of all financial disclosures prior to this agreement? The question landed harder than her refusal. A few people in the gallery shifted in their seats. Quiet murmurs, quickly stilled. Álvaro straightened. Yes, Your Honor, he replied, voice steady. Camila did not look at him. Her attorney rose calmly. Your Honor, we contest the completeness of the disclosure. There it was. Not emotion, not accusation. A formal challenge. Álvaro's confidence thinned. Just slightly. His jaw tightened again, this time holding. He had planned efficiency. A clean ending. A private transition. Instead, the word contest now entered the record. The judge nodded. Then we will review the contested assets individually. That sentence changed everything. What was meant to remain sealed would now be examined, line by line, on record, in open court. Camila exhaled slowly. Not relief. Not fear. Resolve. For months, silence had protected his comfort. Today, she chose clarity over comfort. And clarity has a cost. The courtroom no longer felt predictable. Álvaro had built his career on control. Negotiations closed behind private doors. Deals structured before anyone else understood the leverage. Outcomes shaped long before signatures touched paper. This was different. There was no private conference room. No quiet adjustment. No assistant stepping in to smooth tension. Everything now moved on record. The judge reviewed the preliminary disclosures again. Counsel, I am noting several transfers from Duarte Holdings into secondary accounts 3 months prior to filing. These were not itemized in the initial summary. Álvaro's attorney stood. Your Honor, those were routine reallocations. Routine reallocations, the judge repeated, scanning the document. Then they should have been clearly listed. The word clearly settled heavily between the tables. Álvaro kept his posture straight. He refused to fidget. But the rhythm of the hearing had shifted. He was no longer guiding the pace. Camila watched none of it. She studied the Texas seal behind the bench instead. Solid. Unmoving. A reminder that this was no longer a private conversation between spouses. This was law. He had expected her to protect his image, to avoid discomfort, to prioritize discretion. Instead, she had chosen scrutiny. A quiet divorce would have preserved his authority. A contested hearing invited questions, and questions lead to details. For the first time that morning, Álvaro realized something important. Silence had been his strategy. It was never hers. Camila finally shifted her gaze from the bench to the documents in front of her. Not to search, not to panic, to remain grounded. Her attorney slid a page toward her and whispered, "We're prepared." She nodded once. Across the aisle, Álvaro's confidence began to thin. He kept his back straight, but his fingers pressed firmly against the edge of the table. A subtle tell, the only visible crack. The judge looked toward Camila. "Mrs. Brooks Duarte, are you prepared to proceed with a full financial review today?" The question carried weight. Full review meant time, exposure, testimony if required. Camila answered without hesitation, "Yes, Your Honor." No tremor, no anger, just steadiness. The gallery behind them had grown attentive. What was scheduled as a routine confirmation hearing had turned into something else, something that required attention. Álvaro leaned toward his attorney again, voice low. "We can still request recess." Camila heard it. She did not react. For months, conversations in their Dallas home had ended the same way. His decisions were presented as final, his timelines fixed, his version framed as reasonable. Today, the dynamic shifted. The judge began listing account numbers aloud. Each one spoken in open court reduced the privacy he had relied on. Camila folded her hands neatly on the table, not triumphant, not vengeful. Certain, dignity did not require volume. It required refusal. The judge paused mid-review. Her pen hovered over the file as she examined the final page. "Mr. Duarte," she said carefully, "there is a holding company referenced. Here that does not appear in the original disclosure summary." A stillness returned to the room. Not the earlier silence of expectation. This was scrutiny. Álvaro's attorney cleared his throat. "Your Honor, that entity is inactive." The judge looked up. Inactive entities are still required to be disclosed if assets moved through them within the last fiscal year. A brief silence followed. Camila kept her eyes forward. She had seen the name weeks ago while reviewing statements late at night in their Dallas kitchen. She had not confronted him then. She had waited. Álvaro responded, measured. The transfers were temporary reallocations. The judge's expression did not shift. Temporary or not, the court requires transparency. Transparency, the word echoed stronger than any accusation. The judge closed the file. "We will recess for 30 minutes. Upon return, this court will review the contested assets individually. Full disclosure will be expected." The gavel struck lightly. Recess, but not resolution. Álvaro leaned back slowly, processing the damage. The silent exit he designed had fractured in open court. Camila reached for her wedding ring, held it briefly in her palm, then placed it back down on the table. She had not raised her voice. She had not made a scene. Yet the silence he depended on no longer protected him. And when court resumed, every number would speak. 6 months earlier. Houston. The top floor of Duarte Logistics overlooked the city's financial district. Glass walls framed the skyline as the sun lowered, casting warm light across polished floors and dark wood panels. Álvaro Duarte stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back, measured, focused. He had made up his mind weeks ago. The marriage had become inefficient in his view. Conversations strained, silence stretched. Emotional distance replaced connection. He no longer saw partnership. He saw complications. His assistant entered quietly. "Your 6 o'clock is here." Álvaro nodded. Moments later, a middle-aged attorney in a charcoal suit took a seat across from him. No raised voices, no visible tension. "This will remain confidential," the attorney began. "If handled correctly, it can be completed without public conflict." That was the objective. Private filing, sealed records, structured asset division, minimal disruption to business operations. Álvaro opened a thin leather folder already prepared. He had outlined key assets, corporate holdings, real estate, investment accounts, several transfers already initiated under routine classifications. "I want efficiency," Álvaro said calmly. "No spectacle." The attorney reviewed the preliminary plan. "If your spouse cooperates, This can be concluded quietly. Cooperates. Álvaro leaned back in his chair. She values discretion, he replied. He believed that. The skyline reflected faintly in the office glass behind him, doubling his image. One version facing forward, another faint, almost distant. The attorney slid a document across the table. Initial retainer for strategic planning. Álvaro signed without hesitation. The first step had been taken. Camila did not know. And that, to him, was control. The attorney returned the next evening with a structured outline. Houston's financial district had quieted, but the lights inside Duarte Logistics remained on. Álvaro preferred late meetings. Fewer interruptions. Fewer witnesses. Texas is a community property state, the attorney began, placing a confidential folder on the desk. The word dissolution was printed discreetly across the tab. Anything acquired during the marriage is subject to division. Planning must be precise. Precise. Álvaro reviewed the asset list again. Primary residence, in Dallas. Investment property in the Woodlands. Equity in Duarte Logistics. Offshore partnerships connected to European trade routes. He had already shifted certain liquid assets into holding structures months earlier, categorized as routine business adjustments. Nothing illegal. Nothing dramatic. Just movement. Movement created flexibility. Transfers must appear ordinary, the attorney continued. If challenged, documentation must support business necessity. Álvaro nodded. He did not act impulsively. Every financial shift had been recorded, just not highlighted. This can remain sealed if uncontested, the attorney added. No detailed testimony required. Uncontested. That word reassured him. Camila disliked confrontation. She preferred discussion. Compromise. Privacy. He believed she would sign. Prepare the draft settlement, Álvaro said. I want clarity before filing. As the attorney gathered the documents, Álvaro walked toward the glass wall overlooking Houston's skyline. His reflection stared back at him. Steady, certain. He told himself this was practical, mature, efficient, not betrayal. At home in Dallas, Camila was likely finishing dinner alone again. He checked his watch. He would call her later. After the planning was complete, Dallas. The house felt larger at night. Camila moved through the kitchen slowly, turning off lights one by one. The dining table still held 2 plates, one untouched. Álvaro had texted earlier. Late meeting. Don't wait up. Again. She stood at the sink, hands resting on the counter, staring at her reflection in the dark window. The woman staring back looked composed, put together, strong, but tired. 6 months ago, their conversations had shifted. Subtle, at first. He no longer asked about her day. No longer lingered during dinner. His attention drifted toward his phone, toward schedules, toward meetings that stretched longer than necessary. When she asked if something was wrong, he answered with efficiency. Just work pressure. Always work. Camila did not argue. She gave him space. She believed in partnership, in seasons, in growth. But space had become distance. Later that night, Álvaro entered quietly. Suit still crisp. Expression unreadable. You're still awake? He asked. I was waiting, she replied. He kissed her forehead. Polite. Brief. I have early meetings tomorrow. No discussion. No warmth. She watched him walk upstairs. The house settled into silence again. Camila sat at the dining table and opened her laptop. Not to investigate. Not yet. Just to distract herself. Their life looked stable from the outside. Houston's success. Dallas home. Shared events. Public unity. But inside these walls, connection had thinned. She closed the laptop after a moment. Something had shifted. She just didn't know how far. Weeks passed. The distance no longer felt temporary. Camila began noticing patterns she once ignored. Increased travel to Houston. Private calls taken outside. Financial updates he no longer shared casually over coffee. One afternoon, she stopped by his Houston office unexpectedly after visiting a friend nearby. She had texted him earlier. No response. The receptionist smiled politely. Mr. Duarte is in a meeting. Through the glass wall of the executive conference room, she saw him seated across from a man she did not recognize. A folder rested between them. Dark. Labeled. He looked focused. not relaxed. Intent. Camila stepped back before he noticed her. She told herself it was business. It had to be. That evening, she brought it up gently. I stopped by your office today. Álvaro's reaction was small but sharp. You should have told me. I did text. I was in meetings. The answer ended there. No curiosity about why she came. No invitation into the conversation. She nodded slowly. Later, while reviewing their shared calendar on her phone, she noticed several late entries labeled consultation. No details. Her mind resisted suspicion, but her instincts did not. At dinner, he spoke about expansion plans, international routes, European partners, future investments. Future. The word felt distant. She watched him carefully. He was planning something. And whatever it was, she was not part of the strategy. The discovery came quietly. No confrontation, no raised voices, just a number on a screen. It was late in Dallas when Camila opened their shared financial dashboard to review routine expenses, mortgage draft, utilities, business reimbursements. Then, she saw it. A transfer labeled professional retainer. The amount was significant. 5 figures, withdrawn from a joint account 3 weeks earlier. Her brow tightened slightly. They had not discussed any new consultants, no public relations firm, no expansion advisor. She clicked the transaction details. Receiving firm, Caldwell and Meyer Legal Group. Houston. Her pulse did not race. Instead, a stillness settled over her. Legal. She searched her memory carefully. Had he mentioned litigation? Regulatory review? Contract disputes? No. Camila closed the laptop slowly and sat back in her chair. Upstairs, she heard the faint sound of his footsteps moving across the bedroom floor. He had said nothing. The word retainer lingered in her mind. She did not confront him that night. She did not wake him. Instead, she opened a new tab and searched the firm's website. Family law. Her eyes rested on the practice description. Strategic dissolution planning. The air in the room felt heavier. She folded her hands together and stared at the screen. 6 months before a courtroom. 6 months before the word no. This was the first crack, and she had just seen it. The Dallas gated community was designed for comfort. Wide streets, trimmed lawns, security at the entrance, large homes spaced far enough apart to promise privacy. Inside their house, privacy felt different. It felt like distance. Camila sat alone at the dining table again. 2 plates arranged neatly. 2 glasses of water poured. Only one used. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. 8:10 p.m. Álvaro texted. Running late. Start without me. She stared at the message longer than necessary. When he finally walked in close to 10 p.m., the house lights were dimmed. The food had been covered and reheated twice. You didn't have to wait, he said, loosening his tie. I wanted to, she replied. He nodded absently and opened his laptop at the kitchen island while eating. No conversation about her day. No questions about the nonprofit meeting she had mentioned that morning. Only numbers. She tried again. Are you traveling again next week? Yes. For how long? 2 days. Maybe 3. Maybe. That word used to carry possibility. Now it carried uncertainty. The dining table felt larger than it was. The space between their chairs noticeable. After dinner, he carried his plate to the sink and went upstairs without lingering. Camila remained seated. From the outside, their life still appeared stable. A successful executive. A well-kept home. Shared social appearances. But inside, connection had narrowed to schedules and updates. Logistics. Nothing more. The shift did not happen overnight. It happened in small omissions. He stopped reaching for her hand when they walked into events. Stopped introducing her with warmth. Stopped finishing her sentences with familiarity. At a neighborhood gathering, someone asked how long they had been married. 7 years, Camila answered with a smile. Álvaro corrected her casually. 6.5. The precision sounded harmless, but it felt dismissive. Later that evening, while guests stood near the patio doors, he spoke about expansion plans in Houston. Investors, growth targets, new routes. We're restructuring a few things, he said. Simplifying operations. Simplifying. His eyes did not meet hers when he said it. At home, conversations became brief exchanges of information. You have a package arriving tomorrow. Your meeting is at 9. Did you sign the HOA form? Nothing personal, nothing tender. Camila began noticing the way he no longer paused when she entered a room. No lingering glance, no quiet acknowledgement. It was not a loud disrespect. It was absence. One night, she sat beside him on the couch. "Are we okay?" she asked gently. He didn't look up from his phone. "We're fine." Fine. The word felt empty. She studied his face. Calm, controlled, closed. Loneliness does not always come from being alone. Sometimes it comes from being unseen. Camila stopped asking the question out loud. Instead, she began asking it quietly within herself. "Are we fine?" She replayed the past year in her mind. The long work trips, the guarded phone calls, the careful tone he adopted whenever she asked about finances. She was not naive. She was observant. One afternoon, she walked through their house slowly. The living room with its high ceilings, the framed wedding photo above the fireplace, the guest bedroom rarely used. The house was beautiful. It also felt quiet in a way that unsettled her. She sat at the empty dining table and rested her hands flat against the wood. The space across from her remained untouched. When had conversation become scheduled? When had partnership become maintenance? She remembered how he used to consult her before major decisions, ask for her thoughts, value her perspective. Now, updates arrived fully formed, final. "I've already handled it. I've taken care of it. You don't need to worry." She had believed those words were protection. Now they felt like an exclusion. That evening, while he worked upstairs, Camila opened her journal. She wrote one sentence: "Silence can be controlled." She stared at it for a long time. This was no longer about mood or stress. It was structured, and structure meant intention. The change was no longer subtle. It had rhythm. Breakfast became silent efficiency. He scanned emails while she poured coffee. He checked international markets while she tried to begin small conversations. "Will you be home for dinner tomorrow?" she asked one morning. "Not sure," he replied without looking up. Houston meetings. He didn't explain which meetings. He didn't elaborate. The details stopped flowing to her weeks ago. At social events, he introduced her with formality instead of familiarity. "This is my wife, Camila." No warmth in the tone. No hand at her waist. At home, the television filled the space where conversation once lived. They sat on opposite ends of the couch more often now. She noticed he locked his office door at night. That was new. One evening she tried again. "I miss us," she said quietly. He sighed, rubbing his temple. "We're not in crisis, Camila. I'm just busy." Busy. The word had become his shield. She studied him carefully. Busy men still make time for what matters. She stood and walked to the kitchen, leaving him on the couch, not to create drama, not to demand attention, to think. In the quiet of the house, something firm began forming inside her. The distance was not an accident. It was a decision, and she was done pretending she did not feel it. The awareness did not arrive loudly. It arrived with questions she could no longer ignore. That night, after Álvaro fell asleep, Camila remained downstairs. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the hallway clock. She opened her laptop, not to accuse, to understand. Her search was careful. Texas community property laws, filing requirements in Harris County, sealed divorce proceedings. She read slowly, absorbing each line. Property acquired during marriage, full financial disclosure required. Contested filings open to court review. Her breathing stayed steady. She was not reacting. She was preparing. On the coffee table, their framed wedding photo reflected faintly against the dark screen. She turned it face down without thinking. Her phone buzzed softly upstairs. A notification from his email previewed across her synced device for a brief second before disappearing. Caldwell and Meyer. Her chest tightened slightly, but she did not freeze. The retainer charge, the late meetings, the emotional withdrawal. The pattern aligned. She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes for a moment. If he was planning an exit, he intended to control it. Silently, She reopened the laptop and bookmarked 3 legal resources. Clarity replaced confusion. Whatever was coming, she would not meet it unprepared. The distance at home was no longer a mystery. It was a warning, and she was finally listening. The confrontation did not begin with shouting. It began with preparation. Camila waited until Sunday evening. No meetings, no travel, no convenient exits. Álvaro sat in the living room reviewing quarterly reports. A large framed painting of a Texas landscape hung behind him. Wide fields, open sky, calm. She stood near the staircase for a moment, fingers resting against the railing, steadying herself. "Can we talk?" she asked. He glanced up briefly. "Of course." She walked into the room and sat across from him, not beside him. "I saw the retainer charge," she said evenly. "Caldwell and Meyer." He did not react immediately. "That's a law firm," she continued. "It is," he replied calmly. "For what?" He closed his laptop slowly. "Measured. Controlled. Precaution," he said. "I consult attorneys regularly. It's part of business." "Family law is part of business?" A brief pause. He leaned back. "Camila, you're overanalyzing." It was exploratory. Exploratory. She held his gaze. "Exploring what?" He exhaled lightly, almost amused. "Options. We've both felt distance." He said it as if it were mutual. Balanced. Shared. She noticed the shift. He was reframing. "What options?" She pressed. "Contingency planning," he replied. "That's responsible. Not hostile. Responsible." The word attempted to soften the impact. Camila remained still. "You planned this without telling me," she said quietly. "It was not planning," he corrected. "It was preparation." Preparation for what? He did not answer. The room felt divided. 2 people. 2 realities. Álvaro stood and walked toward the window, hands in his pockets. "You're reacting emotionally," he said, tone even. "I handle risk before it becomes a problem." Camila remained seated. "Is marriage a risk?" she asked. "That's not what I said. It's what you implied." He turned slightly, expression composed. "You've been distant too." There it was. Redirection. She studied him carefully. "I asked if we were okay," she said. "You said we were fine." "And we are functioning," he replied. "There's no crisis." Functioning. As if their relationship were an operating system. Camila felt heat rise in her chest, but her voice did not lift. "You hired a divorce attorney." "I consulted one." "You moved money." "Standard reallocations." "You locked your office." "For privacy." Each response arrived polished, controlled, designed to minimize impact. "You're making this bigger than it is," he added calmly. "Nothing has been filed. Nothing has been filed." The statement was technically true, but intention had already been set in motion. Camila stood slowly now, closing the physical gap between them. "You made decisions about our future without me," she said. "That is not precaution. That is exclusion." His jaw tightened slightly. "You're taking this personally." She let out a soft breath. Of course she was. It was her marriage. The tension between them thickened, not explosive, but steady. Truth stood in the room, and so did manipulation. He moved back toward the couch, reclaiming space as if physical distance could reset control. "Camila, listen carefully," he said, voice steady. "Consulting a lawyer does not equal filing for divorce. Then why choose one who specializes in it?" she asked. "In case things deteriorate." She studied him. "You think this is stable?" He hesitated briefly, then adjusted his posture. "You've been unhappy." The statement caught her off guard. "Unhappy?" she repeated. "You've questioned my decisions. You've been distant." "I felt it." He spoke with calm certainty, as if documenting evidence. She recognized the tactic. Shift the weight. Balance the blame. "You withdrew first," she replied evenly. "You stopped including me in financial decisions. You stopped communicating." "I've been managing growth," he said. "Expansion requires focus. Does marriage not require focus?" He ignored the question. "You're personalizing something strategic," he continued. "I protect assets. That's my responsibility." "I am not an asset," she said. A faint flicker crossed his face. He recovered quickly. No one is attacking you. You hired a representative without telling me. I was exploring options. You were planning. He inhaled slowly, controlled. You're escalating. She felt the clarity settle. He would not acknowledge intent. He would not admit preparation. He would reframe, minimize, redirect. Her anger did not burst. It sharpened. She realized something important at that moment. He wasn't preparing for protection. He was preparing for departure. The conversation did not explode. It cooled. And that felt more dangerous. Camila stepped back, creating space between them. The living room felt divided now, like two separate territories. The Texas landscape painting behind him stretched wide and open, almost mocking the confinement of the moment. You've already decided something, she said quietly. That's not true, Álvaro replied. Then why does it feel final? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he
Austin, she could wait, or she could act. When she signed, the dynamic changed. What would you have done?
Why does it feel final? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the kitchen island and poured himself water. Slow, controlled, buying time. You're interpreting preparation as intention, he said at last. And you're presenting your intention as a precaution. Their eyes locked. Neither raised their voice. That was the unsettling part. He spoke again, tone calm. If a marriage fails, people regret not planning ahead. I refuse to be unprepared. So, you prepared alone, she answered. He did not deny it. Silence settled again, but this time it did not belong to him. Camila felt something shift internally. The pleading instinct she once had, the urge to fix things quickly, began to fade. I will not beg you to choose me, she said. His expression changed slightly, more alert now. No one asked you to. But your actions did. He set the glass down carefully. You're overreacting. No, she replied. I'm observing. The staircase behind her felt solid as she gripped the railing lightly, not for balance, for grounding. For months, she tried to preserve peace. Tonight, she chose self-respect. Álvaro watched her carefully now. Not with warmth, with assessment. You're making this adversarial, he said. That's not necessary. Camila felt the weight of that word. Adversarial, as if asking for honesty had created conflict. She walked back into the center of the room and faced him fully. I'm not making this anything, she replied. You did that when you decided I didn't deserve a conversation. He held her gaze. I was avoiding unnecessary drama. By removing me from my own marriage? The question lingered. For the first time, his composure cracked slightly. Not loudly. Just enough. You're assuming the worst, he said. I'm responding to evidence. Silence again. But this silence felt different. It no longer carried confusion. It carried clarity. She realized something with sudden certainty. Even if he reversed course tomorrow, even if he canceled the attorney, even if he apologized, the secrecy had already changed her. Trust, once fractured, does not return to its original shape. I will not compete with your contingency plans, she said steadily. And I will not convince you to stay. His eyes narrowed slightly. So what are you saying? I'm saying, she continued, voice calm, if you're preparing to leave, I won't stop you. There was no threat in her tone. No tears. Just a decision. She turned toward the staircase, pausing briefly. If this marriage survives, she added, it won't be because I begged for it. She walked upstairs without waiting for a response. Behind her, he stood still. For the first time, he was no longer certain how the outcome would unfold, and she was no longer afraid of it. Austin felt different from Houston and Dallas. Less corporate polish, more grounded energy. Camila parked outside a mid-rise building a few blocks from the Texas Capitol. The dome stood tall in the distance, steady against the bright sky. She sat in her car for a full minute before stepping out. Fear did not look dramatic on her. It looked still. Inside the law office, the decor was simple. Clean desk, framed Texas art, certificates aligned precisely on the wall. Mrs. Brooks Duarte? The receptionist asked. Yes. She was led into a private conference room where a woman in her early 40s stood to greet her. Angela Reyes, the attorney said, extending her hand. Family law. Please, have a seat. Camila placed her folder on the table. bank statements, screenshots, notes. I need to understand my position, she began. Angela listened carefully as Camila explained the retainer charge, the hidden consultations, the asset transfers. You have options, Angela said once she finished. Texas is a community property state. Full disclosure is mandatory. If your husband has initiated protective structuring without informing you, that matters. Camila nodded slowly. I don't want spectacle, she said. I want fairness. Angela leaned forward slightly. Fairness requires transparency. Transparency requires action. The words settled heavily. Action. Camila exhaled quietly. Up until now, she had been responding, observing, enduring. Today would determine whether she remained reactive or choose a direction. Angela opened a legal pad and began outlining the framework. In Texas, she said, anything acquired during the marriage is presumed community property. That includes income, real estate, investments, and business growth, unless clearly separated by agreement. Camila listened carefully. If he has moved funds without disclosure, Angela continued, the court can examine intent. Asset shielding during anticipated divorce is taken seriously. The word anticipated did not escape Camila. He hasn't filed, Camila said quietly. He consulted, Angela replied. That suggests preparation. Camila folded her hands together. What happens if I do nothing? Angela did not soften her answer. If he files first and proposes a sealed settlement, you'll be negotiating from a defensive position. Timing matters. Defensive. Camila understood that language. I don't want revenge, she said. I don't want to hurt him. This isn't about hurting anyone, Angela replied. It's about protecting your legal standing. Protecting. The word felt different from pleading. Angela slid a printed sheet across the table. Contested filing ensures full disclosure. It prevents unilateral narrative control. Narrative control. Camila felt the clarity settle deeper now. For months, she had questioned herself. Wondered if she was overreacting. If she was imagining distance. Now the facts stood plainly. Preparation had begun without her. Silence had been chosen without her. Fear lingered, but it no longer ruled the moment. What would you advise if I were your sister? Camila asked. Angela answered without hesitation. I would tell her not to wait. The room grew quiet. Clarity replaced hesitation. Camila stepped outside onto the Austin sidewalk after the consultation and felt the heat settle against her skin. Traffic moved steadily. People crossed streets. Life continued. Inside her, something had shifted. Fear still existed. Not fear of him. Fear of finality. Once filed, there would be no pretending this was precaution. No returning to quiet conversations over dinner, as if nothing had happened. She walked slowly toward a bench facing the direction of the Capitol dome. He had prepared alone. He had assumed compliance. He had counted on silence. If she filed first, she would change the dynamic completely. No more reacting to his strategy. No more waiting for disclosure. She would define the timeline. Her phone buzzed with a message from Álvaro. Dinner tonight? As if nothing had happened. She stared at the screen. For a moment, doubt surfaced. What if he never intended to follow through? What if consultation was only fear? But clarity answered quickly. Preparation without conversation was already a betrayal of trust. Angela's words echoed. Timing matters. Camila stood and returned to the building. When she re-entered the conference room, Angela looked up calmly. I'm ready to move forward, Camila said. Her voice did not tremble. Fear had not disappeared. It had been placed in its proper position. Behind resolve, Angela placed the petition on the table. Formal, structured, clear. Petition for divorce, Harris County, Texas. Camila read every page slowly. Grounds cited under Texas law. Request for full financial disclosure. Preservation of community property. Notice of contested proceedings. Each paragraph transformed private suspicion into legal language. Angela pointed to the signature line. Once submitted, service will follow. He will be notified formally, not through argument, not through pleading, through the process. Camila held the pen but did not sign immediately. Her mind replayed 7 years in brief flashes. Wedding vows, shared road trips across Texas highways, early mornings filled with plans. She allowed herself one final question. Am I acting from anger? The answer came clearly. No. She was acting from self-respect. Angela waited quietly. Camila signed. The motion felt simple. The meaning was not. Angela gathered the documents and stepped out to process the filing electronically with the Harris County clerk. Camila sat alone for a moment. Her hands rested flat against the table. It was done. No announcement. No confrontation. Just action. When Angela returned, she handed Camila a stamped confirmation. Filed. The word stood bold against the page. Immediately after signing, Camila turned slightly toward the window and exhaled. If you were in her position, would you wait or would you act? Tell me in the comments. This was no longer a reaction. It was direction. Houston. Álvaro was midway through a strategy meeting when his assistant stepped quietly to his side. You've been served, she said under her breath, placing a sealed envelope beside his tablet. He frowned slightly. Served? Yes, sir. Courier delivery. Marked urgent. He dismissed the room calmly and waited until the door closed before opening the envelope. Petition for divorce. Harris County District Court. Filed. Contested. For a moment, he did not move. Camila had not confronted him again after their last conversation. She had not threatened. She had not argued. She had acted. He scanned the filing quickly. Full financial disclosure requested. Review of asset transfers. Preservation orders in place. Preservation. His jaw tightened. She had moved first. He reached for his phone instinctively, then stopped. Calling her immediately would expose surprise, and he did not like appearing unprepared. His attorney answered on the second ring. She filed, Álvaro said evenly. A pause. Contested? Yes. Silence followed on the line. That accelerates scrutiny, the attorney replied carefully. We will respond. Respond. The word sounded reactive. Across the glass wall of his office, Houston's skyline stretched wide and indifferent. He had planned quiet efficiency. Instead, he now faced public procedure, not chaos. Accountability. He lowered the document slowly. Camila had shifted the balance, and for the first time since this began, he was no longer ahead of the timeline. Dallas moved quickly when news surfaced, not loudly. Quietly. Discreet conversations, private messages, invitations that felt slightly altered in tone. Álvaro understood social ecosystems. Reputation was currency in their circle. Investors, board members, philanthropic partners. Perception mattered. The first event after the filing was a charity gala held in a downtown Dallas ballroom. Crystal chandeliers, long tables dressed in white linen, soft music drifting across polished floors. Álvaro arrived alone. That did not go unnoticed. Camila couldn't make it? Someone asked casually. She's focusing on personal matters, he replied smoothly. The answer was neutral, controlled, intentionally vague. Another guest leaned in later near the bar. I heard there might be restructuring at home. He smiled politely. Transitions happen. We're handling it privately. Privately. That word carried weight. He repeated it often that evening. We're keeping things respectful. There's no conflict. It's mutual. He chose language carefully. No blame, no details, just calm management. Across the ballroom, whispers gathered in small clusters. Nothing dramatic, just curiosity. Dallas social circles prized stability. A contested filing suggested friction. Álvaro maintained composure, shook hands, discussed market forecasts, spoke about expansion. But beneath the steady exterior, calculation intensified. The narrative had to be shaped early. If people believed conflict existed, investors might question stability. Image required maintenance. He checked his phone briefly. No new messages from Camila. She had not spoken publicly. Her silence was strategic. By Monday morning the calls began. Not direct accusations. Questions framed as concern. A board member requested a brief check-in. Is everything steady on the home front? Yes, Álvaro replied evenly. Personal adjustments. Business remains unaffected. He repeated the phrase twice that morning. Business remains unaffected. In Dallas, separation could be forgiven. Instability could not. Later that week, he met two investors for lunch at a private club overlooking the city skyline. One of them leaned back and said carefully, "We've heard filings were contested." Álvaro did not flinch. "Legal formality," he replied. "Nothing contentious." The investor held his gaze a moment longer than usual. "Contested implies disagreement." "It implies thoroughness," Álvaro corrected. The room grew briefly quiet. He realized something subtle but significant. He was explaining. That was new. Normally, he led conversations, directed them, closed them. Now he was clarifying. Reputation anxiety settled beneath his calm exterior. He adjusted his approach that evening, sending controlled updates to select contacts. "We remain aligned in values. Privacy is important. Transition handled respectfully." He avoided the word divorce. At home in Dallas, the large house felt quieter than usual. He expected confrontation. Instead, Camila remained composed. She attended no events, made no public statements, posted nothing. Her silence did not protect him. It amplified curiosity. Public image had met legal reality, and the balance was beginning to shift. Camila did not attend the next two social invitations. She declined politely. Prior commitments, she wrote in response to one host. Scheduling conflict, she replied to another. The truth was simpler. She refused to perform stability. The Dallas community noticed absence as quickly as presence. A neighbor stopped by one afternoon with a soft tone and a cautious smile. "Just checking in," she said. "I heard things might be changing." Camila met her gaze calmly. "Things are evolving. No details. No complaints." Inside, the house felt larger than before. Rooms echoed differently when one person moved through them alone. She walked past the formal dining area and paused briefly. The long tables sat untouched, chairs aligned perfectly. Isolation was not new, but now it felt intentional. Her phone buzzed repeatedly over the next few days. Friends asking if she was all right, others asking more directly what had happened. She answered carefully, "We're working through legal matters." Legal. That word carried clarity without accusation. She did not defend herself. She did not criticize him. She did not correct his version of events publicly. Her silence was not fear. It was discipline. At night, she reviewed financial documents with Angela through secure email. Statements, transfers, dates. While he managed perception in ballrooms and boardrooms, she focused on records. The tension between public image and legal procedure widened quietly. In Dallas, stories spread through suggestion, but paper trails spread through proof, and proof does not require gossip. The second gala felt different. Álvaro entered the Texas Charity Ballroom with the same tailored suit, the same steady posture. But the air around him carried questions now. Two executives paused their conversation when he approached. "Álvaro," one greeted. "Good to see you." Their smiles were polite, measured. He responded smoothly, discussing market trends and logistics expansion. He kept topics professional, redirecting any drift toward personal matters. But personal matters kept drifting. "I heard there's a filing," someone said lightly near the bar. "Standard process," he replied. "We're being thorough." Thorough. He repeated the word often. Across the room, a quiet circle formed around a mutual acquaintance who had attended court hearings before in unrelated cases. Speculation moved in low tones. "Contested means disclosure," someone whispered. "Disclosure means review," another replied. Álvaro noticed the shift in energy. Investors did not fear separation, they feared instability. Later that evening, he stepped aside and opened an email from his attorney. Subject line, "Preliminary discovery requests." He scanned the list quickly. Detailed financial documentation requested, transfer explanations required, holding structures to be examined. His jaw tightened slightly. Discovery had begun. At the edge of the ballroom, laughter continued. Music played. Glasses clinked. The public image remained polished. Legal reality moved underneath. He placed the phone back in his pocket and returned to conversation as if nothing had changed. But something had. Control was thinning. The email arrived just before midnight. Angela forwarded a preliminary financial review summary to Camila with a brief note. "We found discrepancies. Camila opened the attachment at the kitchen counter, the only light in the large Dallas house coming from the laptop screen. The report was concise. Multiple transfers routed through Duarte Holdings 3 months prior to initial consultation. Secondary account activity, inconsistent with standard operating patterns. Temporary allocations labeled operational. Operational. She zoomed in on one line item. A 6-figure transfer moved into a subsidiary entity that had not appeared in their shared financial summaries before. She forwarded the document back to Angela. "Is this normal?" Angela responded quickly, not without disclosure. Camila leaned back slowly. This was no longer about suspicion. This was documentation. Across town, Álvaro sat in his Houston office reviewing the same discovery request his attorney had sent earlier. "They're asking for a full breakdown of internal transfers," the attorney explained over speakerphone. "If we delay, the court may compel." Compel. Álvaro stared at the glass reflection of himself in the dark window. He had intended smooth separation, structured, contained. Now line items were under review. Numbers did not respond to narrative management. They responded to scrutiny. He ended the call and looked down at the discovery list again. Hidden movement had drawn attention, and attention, once directed, rarely withdraws. In Dallas, Camila closed her laptop gently. The quiet house felt different now, not lonely, certain. When court resumed, it would not be about perception. It would be about proof. Houston woke under heavy gray clouds. From the top floor of Duarte Logistics, the skyline looked muted, the horizon blurred by incoming rain. Álvaro stood at his desk reviewing the latest communication from his attorney. Forensic review initiated. The phrase was clinical, precise, and dangerous. A legal courier arrived mid-morning with additional discovery requests from Camila's counsel. The envelope was thick, edges crisp, urgency stamped across the front. He signed for it without expression. Inside, the list extended further than before. Detailed breakdown of subsidiary entities. Historical transfer patterns over 18 months. Full ledger for Duarte Holdings. 18 months. That timeline cut deeper than expected. He dialed his attorney immediately. "They're expanding scope," he said. "They're thorough," the attorney replied. "Contested filings allow that." Álvaro walked toward the window, watching the sky darken over Houston. "This is unnecessary," he said. "It's procedural," the attorney corrected. Procedural meant unavoidable. Across town, in her Dallas kitchen, Camila reviewed a spreadsheet Angela had sent earlier that morning. Several transactions were highlighted in yellow. Transfers routed through a European affiliate. Funds reallocated, then redirected again. Layered movement, Angela had noted. Complex but traceable. Camila felt something settle in her chest. This was not precaution. This was concealment. The confirmation did not produce chaos inside her. It produced clarity. Discovery had begun. And once financial trails were opened, they rarely closed quietly. Angela scheduled a forensic accountant to review the documents. By Thursday afternoon, Camila sat across from a specialist who spoke in numbers rather than emotion. "We traced multiple transfers routed through secondary entities," he explained, sliding a printed chart across the table. Funds moved from primary operating accounts into a holding structure, then into a limited liability subsidiary. Camila studied the highlighted figures. "Is that illegal?" she asked. "Not inherently," he replied. "But the timing matters. These movements occurred shortly before legal consultation. Timing." Again, he tapped a specific column. This entity was inactive for years. It became active 3 months before the retainer charge. Her jaw tightened slightly. "So this wasn't routine?" "No," he said plainly. "This was repositioning." Repositioning sounded strategic, calculated. Angela leaned forward. "If the court determines these transfers were intended to limit equitable division, they can compel reclassification." Compel. The word carried weight. Camila folded her hands together. For months, she had wondered if she misread distance. Now the documentation confirmed intent. Betrayal did not arrive in loud confession. It appeared in line items. Across Houston, Álvaro received another notice. Supplemental discovery request. His attorney's message was brief. "They're pressing harder." He paced his office slowly. This is excessive," he muttered. They're building leverage, the attorney replied. Full disclosure may become mandatory. Mandatory meant public record. Public record meant scrutiny beyond Dallas whispers. The storm outside thickened. Pressure was no longer social. It was legal. The spreadsheet did not lie. Camila spread the printed summaries across the dining table in precise rows. Highlighter marks ran down the pages, each one drawing attention to dates that aligned too perfectly to ignore. 3 months before the retainer. 2 months before emotional withdrawal became obvious. Multiple transfers routed through Duarte Holdings. She read each line again slowly. Transfer. Entity activation. Secondary routing. Capital shift. The pattern felt intentional. Her chest tightened briefly, but she refused to let anger take control. She placed both hands flat against the table and steadied her breathing. This was not chaos. It was confirmation. He had prepared for departure while sitting across from her at dinner. While telling her everything was fine, the realization did not break her. It clarified her. Across Houston, Álvaro reviewed the same flagged transactions with his attorney via video call. They're framing this as concealment, the attorney said. It was restructuring, Álvaro replied sharply. The timing weakens that argument. Timing again. He ended the call and stood by the window as rain began striking the glass. Houston's skyline blurred under the storm. He had counted on quiet compliance. Instead, she had activated a forensic review. His phone vibrated with another update. Supplemental documentation required within 10 days. 10 days. For the first time, urgency replaced confidence. Discovery was tightening, and control was no longer firmly in his hands. The pressure intensified by the end of the week. Angela forwarded a formal motion draft to Camila for review. If opposing counsel does not provide complete documentation voluntarily, she explained over the phone, we will request court complement. Camila read the language carefully. Motion to compel full financial disclosure. The wording was firm, structured, unmistakable. This becomes public record? She asked. Yes, Angela replied. Once filed, it places judicial weight behind the request. Judicial weight. Camila closed her eyes briefly. There was no turning this into a private negotiation anymore. The moment for quiet resolution had passed when he chose secrecy. File it, she said calmly. Angela did not hesitate. Understood. Across Houston, Álvaro received notice within hours. His attorney's message was direct. They've filed a motion to compel. Court hearing likely. He read the attachment twice. Failure to disclose fully may result in sanctions. Sanctions. The word struck harder than rumor ever could. He paced his office, tension rising beneath controlled movements. This is excessive, he muttered. They're positioning for leverage, the attorney replied. The court will expect full transparency. Full transparency meant documents entered into record. Entities examined line by line. Timelines scrutinized. Outside, rain pressed heavily against the glass, dark clouds rolling across the skyline. The legal battlefield had shifted. This was no longer about managing narrative in ballrooms. It was about answering under authority. Pressure was building, and the court was now directly involved. The hearing lasted less than 20 minutes. Harris County District Court. No raised voices. No dramatic exchanges. Just structured argument. Angela presented the timeline clearly. Transfers initiated prior to consultation. Entity activation inconsistent with historical use. Incomplete disclosure in preliminary response. Álvaro's attorney countered with routine business explanations. Reallocations. Strategic positioning. Operational flexibility. The judge listened without interruption. Then she asked a single question. Were these entities fully disclosed at the time of initial filing? A brief pause. They were referenced, Álvaro's attorney answered carefully. Referenced is not itemized, the judge replied. The courtroom fell silent. The judge adjusted her glasses and reviewed the motion once more. This court grants the motion to compel, she said firmly. Full financial disclosure is required within 14 days. Failure to comply will result in further action. The gavel struck lightly. Compelled. There would be no partial summaries. No selective documentation. No narrative framing. Numbers would be produced. Records would be examined. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Álvaro stood still for a moment longer than usual. 14 days. Across from him, Camila remained composed. No celebration, no visible triumph, just steadiness. The power dynamic had shifted. He had prepared in silence. She had responded through process. Now authority required transparency, and transparency would bring everything into light. 14 days. The clock had started. The invitation came through his attorney first. A proposal for private discussion. No court reporters, no filings, just conversation. Location: a hill country property outside Austin. Neutral ground. Camila read the message twice before responding. She agreed. The ranch sat wide and quiet, under a fading Texas sky. Open fields stretched toward low hills. The air carried the scent of dry grass and distant cedar. Álvaro was already there when she arrived. No attorneys in sight. Just a long wooden table set on the back patio facing the horizon. He stood as she approached. "Thank you for coming," he said. She nodded once. "You requested it." The sun dipped lower, casting warm light across the landscape. For a moment, the setting almost softened the tension between them. Almost. "I didn't expect a motion to compel," he began. "You expected compliance," she replied calmly. He didn't deny it. Instead, he gestured toward the chairs. "Sit. Let's talk without escalation." Escalation, as if structure had created conflict. She sat across from him. "I don't want this to become destructive," he continued. "Public disclosure benefits no one. Transparency benefits fairness," she said. He studied her face. The distance between them felt larger than the land behind them. "I'm prepared to revise the settlement," he said. Privately. There it was. An offer, but not yet an apology. The sun lowered behind the hills, casting long shadows across the ranch patio. The Texas sky burned orange and gold, calm in contrast to the conversation unfolding at the table. Álvaro leaned forward slightly. "I'm willing to adjust the division," he said. "Additional equity from Duarte Holdings, immediate liquidity. The Dallas property transferred fully to you." He spoke like a negotiator closing a deal, measured, structured. Camila listened without interruption. "This avoids extended review," he continued. "No forensic testimony, no public hearings. We both move forward with dignity." Dignity. The word landed carefully between them. She folded her hands loosely on the table. "And the holding accounts?" she asked. "We can restructure those as part of the agreement." Restructure, not disclosed. He met her gaze. For the first time since this began, there was something different in his expression. Regret, not loud, not dramatic, subtle. "I didn't want this to become hostile," he said quietly. "I thought managing it quietly would protect both of us." "By excluding me?" she asked. "I thought you would prefer peace." Peace. She studied him carefully. He had built his identity around control, around planning ahead, around anticipating risk. Now the risk had shifted. Public scrutiny, legal exposure, reputation strain. His revised offer was not only generous, it was containment. The open landscape behind him stretched wide and free, yet the conversation felt narrower than ever. The sun had fully dipped behind the hills, leaving a deep amber glow across the open Texas landscape. The ranch felt expansive, but the space between them felt precise and defined. Camila kept her voice steady. "I don't want your revised offer," she said. Álvaro inhaled slowly. "It's equitable. More than equitable. This stopped being about equity when you removed me from the process." He leaned forward, forearms resting on the wooden table. "I believe discretion would protect us." "Discretion protects image," she replied. "Transparency protects integrity." The wind moved lightly through the dry grass beyond the patio. For a moment, neither spoke. "I misjudged how you would respond," he admitted quietly. She studied him carefully. That was the closest he had come to acknowledgement. "You didn't misjudge my reaction," she said. "You underestimated my threshold." He absorbed that. "I never wanted to damage your reputation," he added. "My reputation isn't fragile," she answered. "It's anchored." Silence settled again, but it no longer felt sharp. It felt like a resolution forming. She realized something fully now. She was not sitting here hoping he would reconsider the marriage. She was sitting here because she needed the record to reflect fairness. If she accepted his private revision, the numbers might improve, but the narrative would remain controlled, and she would remain silent. She had already chosen differently. Her refusal was no longer emotional. It was structural. The sky deepened into navy as ranch lights flickered on along the patio. Álvaro stood and walked a few steps toward the railing, looking out over the darkened fields. "We can still end this without public review," he said without turning around. "No further hearings, no testimony. We sign, we close it. Close it." As if closure were a transaction, Camila rose slowly from her chair. "You want control over how this ends," she said. "I want discretion. You want silence." He turned back toward her. "I want resolution. Resolution requires acknowledgement," she replied. He ran a hand through his hair, tension no longer fully hidden. "If this continues in court," he said carefully, "details become recorded. That's the point." He stared at her. "You're willing to expose everything?" "I'm willing to document everything." The distinction mattered. She stepped away from the table and walked a few paces toward the open field. The ranch stretched wide under the dark sky, vast and unconfined. For months he had moved strategically in private. Now he feared structured review. "I won't agree to a sealed revision," she said firmly. "If this ends, it ends transparently." He understood the implication. The last quiet option was dissolving. "I'm trying to protect us," he said once more. "You're trying to protect yourself," she answered calmly. The final attempt at private resolution had failed. The ranch fell silent except for the wind moving through the open fields. Álvaro remained near the patio railing, shoulders squared, gaze fixed on the dark horizon. "You're choosing conflict," he said quietly. "I'm choosing record," Camila replied. He turned toward her fully now. "You know what continued litigation means," he said. "Extended review, public filings, questions." "Yes. And you're comfortable with that?" She met his eyes without hesitation. "I'm comfortable with the truth." The words settled between them with final weight. He exhaled slowly, the controlled calm he relied on thinning for the first time that evening. "This will not stay contained," he warned. "It was never contained," she answered. "It was hidden." A long pause followed. The last quiet pathway had closed. He understood that now. No revised settlement would be signed under a ranch sunset. No sealed agreement would protect selective disclosure. The only route forward ran through Harris County courtrooms. Procedure, testimony, if required, full documentation. Camila walked toward her car without asking for further discussion. The gravel shifted softly under her steps. Behind her, the open Texas landscape stretched wide, unrestrained. He remained where he stood. Control had slipped again. The courtroom would resume, and this time there would be no private alternative waiting in reserve. The inevitability settled heavily in the night air. They would return to court, and everything would follow. Harris County District Court. The gallery held more people than before. Not media, not spectacle. Observers, colleagues, quiet members of the Dallas social circle. A few industry figures seated near the back. Curiosity had moved from the ballrooms into the courtroom. The Texas flag stood upright behind the bench, unmoving. Camila entered first and took her seat calmly. Navy suit again, hair pulled back. No jewelry except small...
The verdict ended a marriage, but it began something else. Clarity became purpose.
Navy suit again, hair pulled back. No jewelry except small studs in her ears. Her wedding ring was no longer on the table. It was no longer on her hand. Álvaro entered moments later with his attorney. His expression remained composed, but the weight of the proceeding showed in the slight tension around his eyes. The judge took her seat and reviewed the docket. "This matter concerns full financial disclosure and contested division of marital assets," she began. Formal, clear. Angela stood first. "Your Honor, forensic review identified multiple transfers routed through secondary entities shortly before legal consultation. These were not fully itemized in preliminary filing." The courtroom remained silent. Angela projected a summary chart onto the screen, highlighted numbers, dates aligned in sequence. Exposure did not require accusation. It required documentation. Álvaro's attorney rose next. These transfers were business reallocations. No concealment was intended. The word intended hung briefly in the air. The judge looked toward Álvaro directly. Mr. Duarte, were these entities activated prior to marital consultation? A pause. Yes, Your Honor. The first crack. Public. Measured truth had entered the record. The courtroom remained still as the financial charts stayed projected on the screen. Angela moved methodically through the timeline. March 3rd, activation of subsidiary entities. March 15th, capital transfer. April 1st, retainer paid to family law counsel. April 8th, additional reallocation. Each date was precise. Each number highlighted. Exposure did not raise its voice. It simply pointed. Álvaro kept his posture straight, but his hands rested tightly together on the table. Mr. Duarte, the judge asked, why were these reallocations not fully itemized in your initial summary? He cleared his throat lightly. They were operational movements within corporate discretion. Operational discretion, the judge repeated. During anticipation of dissolution, the room held its breath. Anticipation. He paused before answering. Yes, Your Honor. The word settled heavily in the space. Camila did not react visibly. No glance. No shift. Just stillness. Humility entered the room quietly. Not as an apology. As acknowledgement. The judge leaned forward slightly. This court does not question business acumen. It questions disclosure. Transparency is not optional in contested proceedings. Across the gallery, a few observers lowered their eyes. Public image had met formal review. Angela requested equalization adjustments based on reclassified assets. Clear, structured, no dramatics, just fairness articulated through documentation. Camila finally rose when invited to speak. Her voice remained even. I am not asking for punishment, she said. I am asking for a full record. Measured truth. Nothing more. When Camila finished speaking, the room remained silent for a long moment. No emotional display. No trembling. Just clarity. I supported our growth, she continued calmly. I attended investor functions. I represented our household publicly. I trusted shared decision-making. When I discovered preparation without disclosure, I chose legal transparency. Her words were direct, not accusatory. The judge nodded slightly. Mrs. Brooks Duarte, are you alleging intentional concealment? I am alleging incomplete disclosure, Camila replied. The timing suggests anticipation. I am asking the court to consider that measured, precise. Álvaro listened without interruption. This was not the private ranch patio. This was recorded. Angela submitted the forensic summary formally into evidence. Printed exhibits were handed to the clerk. Copies distributed. Each document moved from personal discovery into institutional review. The power shift was visible now. Months ago he dictated timing. Now timing belonged to the court. The judge turned to Álvaro again. Mr. Duarte, do you dispute the sequence presented? He paused. No, Your Honor. 2 words. Public. Humility did not require an apology. It required acknowledgement under authority. The courtroom spectators remained attentive, absorbing the exchange. Truth was no longer a private argument between spouses. It had become a documented fact. The judge gathered the exhibits neatly. I will review all submissions, she said. Court will recess briefly, but the decision ahead would carry weight. The courtroom emptied slowly during recess, but tension did not leave with the spectators. Camila remained seated at the petitioner's table, hands folded neatly in front of her. She did not look toward Álvaro. Across the aisle, he spoke quietly with his attorney. No raised voice, no visible frustration, but the tightness in his posture remained. Exposure had already occurred. Now the outcome rested with the bench. When the judge returned, the room rose again in unison. The Texas flag behind her stood still, framing the authority of the moment. She adjusted the documents before her. This court acknowledges that asset transfers occurred during anticipation of dissolution and were not fully itemized in initial filings, she began. The words carried formal weight. While business discretion is recognized, full transparency is required in contested proceedings. Accordingly, the court will reclassify the disputed transfers as community property subject to equitable division. A quiet shift moved through the gallery. Reclassification, public correction. Álvaro's jaw tightened, but he did not interrupt. The judge continued outlining adjustments, percentage allocations, timeline compliance, documentation deadlines. Camila listened without visible reaction. No smile, no relief, just acceptance. Truth had been reviewed. Now it would be formalized. The judge gathered the final papers. I will issue a written order. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck lightly. The verdict had been delivered in substance. But something remained. The written order would seal the final terms. And until that arrived, the story was not fully closed. The courtroom did not empty immediately. Spectators lingered in quiet clusters, whispering observations. A few glanced discreetly toward Álvaro before looking away. The atmosphere carried something new. Accountability. Camila remained seated for a moment longer, steady, composed. The wedding ring that once marked her hand was gone. No symbol left to negotiate. Across the aisle, Álvaro stood still, absorbing the outcome. The reclassification would impact more than finances. It would recalibrate perception. He approached her slowly. I didn't expect this path, he said quietly. You expected silence, she replied. He nodded once. No defense, no argument, just acceptance of the record. A clerk approached their table. The written order will be finalized after judicial review, she said. You will receive notification. Finalized after review. There was still one pause left in the process. The judge had ruled in principle. The written judgment would formalize everything. As they waited for the judge to return briefly to clarify compliance deadlines, Camila looked ahead calmly. Before we hear the final confirmation, if you've been following this Texas story of accountability and dignity, subscribe now for more relationship stories grounded in truth and consequence. Moments like this matter. The judge re-entered briefly, clarified procedural timelines, then stepped away to finalize documentation. The courtroom grew quiet again. Not tense, resolved. But until the written order was signed, the final words still belonged to the bench. And everyone waited. The written judgment arrived 2 weeks later. Formal, structured, final. Harris County District Court had signed the order. Asset division reclassified. Holdings adjusted. Documentation requirements closed. There would be no appeal. Camila read the final page slowly at her Dallas dining table, the same table where she once spread forensic reports in silence. This time, her hands were steady for a different reason. Relief. Not celebration, not triumph. Relief. The numbers were equitable. The reclassification stood. The holding entities had been absorbed back into community valuation. It was over. Upstairs, the house echoed faintly. Large rooms, high ceilings, wide hallways. Beautiful, but no longer hers. By mutual compliance, the Dallas property would transfer to her temporarily before liquidation. After that, she had already made another decision. Austin. She walked through each room one last time that afternoon. The empty dining table. The quiet living room. The staircase railing she once gripped during confrontation. There was no bitterness in her reflection. Only distance. Loss does not always mean defeat. Sometimes it marks completion. Across town, Álvaro reviewed the final order in his Houston office. He did not argue. He did not call his attorney again. He understood. The court had not punished him. It had corrected the record. He closed the file and stared briefly at his reflection in the office glass. Control had shifted, and he had learned something in the process. Austin welcomed her with a quiet sunrise light. The skyline stood clean against a pale blue sky as Camila drove into the city with only what she chose to bring. No excess, no display. The new apartment overlooked a modest stretch of downtown. Not grand, not symbolic of loss, intentional. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. Empty walls, fresh paint, open space. Reinvention rarely begins loudly. It begins with a decision. Over the next few weeks, she met with Angela again, this time not as a client in crisis, but as a woman asking different questions. How many women delay action because they don't understand their financial position? Camila asked. Many, Angela replied honestly. Camila had spent months reading balance sheets, tracing transfers, understanding equity structures she once trusted without question. Knowledge had changed her posture. It had removed fear. She began outlining a consulting concept focused on financial literacy for women navigating marriage, partnership, and separation. Not adversarial, not hostile. Prepared. Her first workshop was small, 8 women seated around a conference table in a rented office space downtown. She stood at the front calmly. Financial awareness is not suspicion, she told them. It is participation. The room listened carefully. She wasn't teaching bitterness. She was teaching clarity. Outside, Austin traffic moved steadily beneath the morning sun. Her identity was no longer tied to shared reputation. It was tied to earned confidence. 3 months later, her consulting work expanded beyond small workshops. A local Austin business group invited her to speak on financial participation within partnerships. The room was larger this time. 25 women, some married, some separated, some are simply curious. Camila stood confidently at the front of the room, a projector behind her displaying clean, simple slides. Community property basics, disclosure rights, understanding asset structures. She did not mention Álvaro by name. She did not narrate bitterness. She spoke about awareness. Self-respect includes understanding what you share, she said evenly. Silence about finances does not preserve peace. It limits partnership. Heads nodded around the room. Afterward, several women approached her privately. I never thought to review our statements, one admitted. I always assumed I didn't need to, another said quietly. Camila listened carefully, offering guidance without alarm. Knowledge, she had learned, was empowering without being aggressive. Later that evening, she walked along Lady Bird Lake, the Austin skyline reflecting across the water. The air felt lighter here, not because pain had disappeared, because she had grown through it. Internal victory does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like calm confidence. Her phone buzzed with an email notification, a speaking invitation from a regional women's leadership summit. She smiled slightly. Loss had taken one identity, clarity had built another. Houston felt unchanged. Traffic moved. Deals closed. Meetings filled the calendar. Yet, something in Álvaro's routine had shifted. One evening, while reviewing quarterly reports, he paused when a familiar name appeared in a business newsletter. Camila Brooks Duarte, to headline Austin Women's Financial Leadership Forum. He read the short article twice. It described her consulting focus. Financial literacy, transparency in partnership, structured awareness, no bitterness, no attack, just clarity. He leaned back slowly in his chair. Across the office, the skyline glowed under late afternoon light, the same view he had stood before when this began. Control had once defined him. Preparation had been his instinct, but preparation without conversation had cost him more than asset adjustment. He thought back to the Hill Country Ranch, the moment she refused secrecy, the moment he realized she would not accept containment. She had not tried to damage him. She had insisted on record. That distinction mattered now. A quiet humility settled inside him. Not humiliation, reflection. He closed the newsletter and stared briefly at his reflection in the glass. She had turned exposure into education. He had turned caution into concealment. The difference was clear. Across Austin, Camila finalized her presentation slides for the leadership forum. Her office space was small but bright, sunlight pouring through wide windows. Her name stood printed neatly on the conference program. Earned, not inherited, not attached, built. The leadership forum filled quickly. Women from across Texas gathered in a downtown Austin conference space, notebooks open, attention steady. The Austin skyline glowed softly through tall windows as morning light spread across the room. Camila stepped to the podium with calm assurance. She did not introduce herself as someone who had survived betrayal. She introduced herself as someone who had learned the value of participation. Financial clarity is not confrontation, she said. It is a partnership, and when partnership shifts, clarity protects dignity. The audience listened closely. She spoke about understanding shared assets, about asking questions early, about refusing silence when transparency is required. No anger colored her words, only conviction. After the session, several women remained behind to thank her. One said quietly, "I never realized I had the right to ask." "You always have the right," Camila replied gently. Later that afternoon, she walked alone along the edge of the city, sunlight warming the pavement beneath her steps. The open Texas sky stretched wide above her. Back in Houston, Álvaro closed another business deal. Efficient, structured, controlled. But some lessons remain longer than contracts. He had learned that discretion without dialogue creates distance. She had learned that self-respect requires action. Their marriage ended in court, but her identity began there. As this story closes, I want to ask you something. What does self-respect mean in your relationships? Would you choose comfort, or would you choose clarity? Share your thoughts below. Your perspective matters.